It's a K-State UCF crossover. Which team is going to be in better position headed into fall camp?
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome on in to Locked On College Crossover. That's Locked On UCF and Locked On K-State. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making us your first listen of every day. Joining me, as he does from time to time, to talk K-State and UCF is my good friend, Christian. Christian, today's show, we're going to talk about UCF and K-State, that Big 12 opener. They face off, where we think they'll land in the preseason rankings, and take a look back at the spring for both teams. It was a little bit of an odd spring across college football, so we'll talk about that in our last segment. Let's start with UCF versus K-State, September 27th. Both teams will be looking to get their Big 12 schedule kicked off with a win. Look, UCF is not there's not going to be a lot of expectations on UCF, I think, in Scott Frost's first year. But K-State was a team last year that was picked to finish second in the conference in the Big 12. Certainly, they had a chance to make the playoff last year, along with some other teams. They blew it. But what do you think about that opener here for K-State? Do they kick some UCF butt to kick off their Big 12 schedule?
Well, it's not the Big 12 opener for K-State, actually. It's actually the third Big 12 team they'll play, but it'll be the second in the Big 12. You got to remember, Kansas State's opening the season week 0 in Dublin against Iowa State. That's technically a Big 12 matchup.
That's right. That's right. They do.
I know it's weird to think about having a conference game on week 0. That's unlikely. So we would normally probably start against UCF. And then we play Arizona in a non-conference game in week 3, and then we come take on UCF. So lots of things happening, but overall, I'm excited this season. And when I look at the UCF one, it's exciting to have you come to Manhattan. That's going to be an absolute delight to have Scott Frost come to Manhattan. And that'll be a really good matchup. But to me, the first thing that comes to my mind before I even look into this game and dive into it is that who you guys played beforehand. When I was looking at this schedule and diving through and things like that, I was like, man, you got to take on Bill Belichick and the Tar Heels right before you come to Manhattan.
I'm looking forward to that one. Actually,
that's going to be the real true test, I think, and see what this team is before heading into Big 12 play. So I think your non-conference schedule is more tough than ours. We have North Dakota and Army, and then, as I mentioned, Arizona is technically a non-conference game, which I think Arizona's going to be at the bottom of this conference regardless this year. But UNC, I mean, a lot of people are hyping them up, and I don't think it's just because of their coach.
Yeah, look, UCF needs to be 2-1 at worst headed into K-State. Like you mentioned, it's not your Big 12 opener, but it is ours. And there'll be a lot of pressure, I think, on that game to at least show off that you can compete. Now, if you ask, again, we'll talk about where they rank in the preseason, but in terms of how they project in record, this is going to be a team that's going to be struggling, I think, to make a bowl game. But under Scott Frost, I think that should be the floor. 6 wins should be the floor. Gus had a lot of issues. He had a lot of issues. I think he bet his career in Orlando on KJ Jefferson, and when it didn't work out, he didn't have a backup plan. He went to Ja'Cory Brown. They were on their 4th string quarterback, and nobody got hurt, Christian. Like, I don't know anyone who goes to their 4th string quarterback in a season because of poor play, but certainly that's where UCF was at last year. So it is an interesting date there early in the season, I think, for both teams. If you're K-State, you probably know a little bit more about who you are headed into that game because, like you said, you've got 2 Big 12 matchups before that. If you're UCF, I think you're finding out who you are versus K-State in that 4th week.
Yeah, I'm with you. And if we're over compensating North Carolina, which is completely possible, right? We like to do that when legendary coaches come into play. Then maybe that isn't going to be the truest test for UCF until they get to Kansas State, because Kansas State's going to be a really good team this year. And I'm not just saying that because I host the podcast on Locked On Kansas State. They are going to be a very good team. They started the season last year 7-1. They did fall off towards the end, but I think they've gained a lot of momentum this offseason. I really think that's going to carry in to week 0 in Dublin against Iowa State. But on the flip side, talking about the way that the season ended for you guys, obviously losing 8 of the last 9 games is not the way that you want to end your season. And that's obviously why you saw a coaching change. The quarterback controversy is interesting. You going to so many different quarterbacks last year. I feel like you're in that same boat now. We kind of talked off the air before we hit record on this bad boy. I was asking, who do you think the quarterback's going to be heading into week 1? And because to me, I think there's a couple options and I think it's wide open. Now, you might have a little bit more of an idea than I do. You pay attention to this every single day, your team every day, if you will. But yeah, Cam Fancher coming in from Florida Atlantic. You got Tavon Jackson from Indiana, both with starting potential. Both have played in games in their last stop. And now they get a chance to do it with Scott Frost. And Scott Frost coming back. That's a good feeling, right? Do most of your fans like that?
Yeah, I think he was a popular pick to return. Look, when you talk to Scott Frost, he had a quote. And he said, when you're on the road, when you're chasing success, sometimes they forget to tell you to stop when you're happy. And he referred to being at UCF the last time as the last time he was happy. Now he chased the Nebraska dream. Obviously, it didn't work out for him, but certainly I think with UCF in the Big 12, had they been in the Big 12 the first go around, I'm not sure he leaves for Nebraska. It's the opportunity, I think, to achieve the ultimate goal, which is a national championship in college football, that drives you out of places like UCF. Now that you're in the Big 12, that means if you're a Big 12 champion, they can't leave you out of it. Look what happened to Arizona State last year, winning the whole thing. Not a lot of expectations on them, but certainly you can come from the back of the pack now if you have the kind of season that UCF had in 2017 when Scott Frost was here and they went undefeated, and you cannot be left out of the conversation or the opportunity to play for a national title or compete for a national title. So the quarterback race is going to be interesting. I think it's going to be if Scott Frost is successful this go around, it's going to be the hallmark of his tenure at UCF the second go around, is whether or not he can develop quarterbacks or not. Cam Fancher, Tavon Jackson, I think it's a battle between these two guys to see who's going to win that starting job personally. If you're Scott Frost, I think you're maybe in a little bit of an advantageous situation where you don't have that many guys you got to split reps with. You just figure out which one of these guys is first and which one's second, and then keep it pushing. And if one doesn't perform, you move on to the next. So they've got to figure out how to get this offense going. Now, I think the expectations are going to be a little higher in Manhattan next year. Certainly, like I said, as I mentioned, K-State was well positioned to make the playoff going into November last year, and just couldn't close. I think I could say the same probably for like BYU, just in a really, really good position last year, headed into November. And there's so many opportunities for teams. Colorado was another team in the Big 12 that, probably Iowa State, man, had a real good shot to make the playoff, blew it. Where do you see K-State here? I think you guys, Avery Johnson, right at quarterback here.
Yep.
How does he project, in this Big 12 race next year?
Well, if you look at On3 and their recent top 10 quarterbacks for heading into the season, he's nowhere to be found, which I think is absolutely egregious. I can't believe it that they're just not even giving him any kind of credit. Going into his second full season as a starter, obviously last year was his first year after Will Howard, who just won a national championship, transferred out to Ohio State, just drafted the Pittsburgh Steelers at K-State roots. He took over from Will Howard last year. And as I mentioned earlier, they started 7-1. And then, as you mentioned, in November, things got different. They had a terrible loss to Houston, and then the wheels fell off. When you lose to a team like Houston that had a bad season alone, then they lose to Arizona State, who we all know was a complete shock to the conference last year. And then they lose to Iowa State in Farmageddon, and they finished the season 8-4. It was just a bad overall season when you look at it like that. It was a great start, but a disappointing finish and got us to play Rutgers in the Rate Bowl. Not what we were looking forward to. One of the greatest bowl games. It was such an awesome comeback game for Kansas State to win. But overall, when I look at this team and what they had to overcome last year with the chip on their shoulder in the first year of Avery Johnson, I thought there was going to be a lot of issues heading into the portal, with the winter portal, with the spring portal, with a lot of players leaving, thinking they need to go to greener pastures. They started off strong and then they fell off. That didn't happen. That wasn't the case, Mike, and that was super surprising. We thought we were going to see players like Jace Brown, Dylan Edwards possibly leave. In both of these portal windows, no one at a high volume, and I know you unfortunately can't say the same thing, left in the portal.
Yeah.
And it was Kansas State is really just ready to run it back. So I do think they're going to be towards the top of the Big 12 champion or Big 12 standings and possibly even make it to the Big 12 championship game. But I'm hoping they don't find themselves in the preseason media rankings towards the top, right? We don't want that to happen.
Well, certainly continuity helps a lot in this conversation, right? If you've got continuity of roster year over year, continuity of coaching, it helps. Certainly in those teams that have that will be projected a little high. And as you mentioned, last year, the preseason Big 12 rankings were wacky. What will they look like this year? We'll talk about that right after a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode of Locked On Kansas State is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action right now. When you join FanDuel and place a $5 bet, you can get $250 in bonus bets if that bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy. Love the interface, and whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into the player props, I am absolutely hooked on FanDuel. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuels have so many ways to bet on your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into the same game parlay for your chance to win big. So don't miss out. Again, place your first $5 bet, get a $250 bonus bet. So head to FanDuel.com and claim that bonus bet today.
The preseason rankings will come out during Big 12 media days, as they normally do. I vote in a certain conference's media rankings every year. I can tell you it is fun seeing how wrong we are as media every single year when it comes to this. Last year, a lot of people were wrong about the Big 12 standings. Arizona State was famously picked to finish last, and they won the whole damn thing. And let me tell you something. When they got to the playoff, they did not disappoint versus Texas. I don't care what the end score game was.
I'm with you.
I thought they represented the Big 12 well as the Big 12 champion versus Texas. I think what that game showed is ultimately recruiting wins. At the end of the day, Quinn Ewers made the plays that he needed to make at the end of the game to push Texas past Arizona State. But look, man, they played well enough. Cameron Scatterboo became a draft pick last year, and Kenny Dillingham got in front of the media and said, if you want more of this, give us money. We need NIL money to keep this going. Christian, K-State was picked to finish second. I think we both agree with what they have coming back. With people kind of underestimating Avery Johnson, I expect them to finish top 4 in the conference easily next year. Where do you see them finishing in the Big 12 standings here with the media poll preseason?
I'll say realistically or in the media poll. In the media poll, I'm hoping that they play the chip on their shoulder and play it very low. In 2022, when they went and won the Big 12 championship, they were predicted 5th to win that, or to be in the preseason poll. Oh, and for the record, TCU, the team that lost in the Big 12 championship to Kansas State, but found themselves in the national championship game that year, was projected to go 7th. So the media members don't do too great when it comes to these Big 12 media polls, at least as of late. They did okay in 2023 in Texas and Oklahoma's last year. They did okay there. We'll give them the caveat, but other than that, hasn't been so good. But realistically, if I'm going to say not in the polls, but how I feel, I'm with you. I think top 4 is a completely safe thing for Kansas State to think that that's where they're going to finish. I like some teams like BYU. I think they're going to have another step forward this year. It's hard not to count out Arizona State. just based on what they did last year. And although they lost Scatterboo, they still have a pretty good quarterback in there. I like what Kenny Dillingham's doing with that squad. Watching him, and I know spring practice hasn't been the greatest coverage across the Big 12 and across all of college football, but we've seen some things from Kenny Dillingham, and the way he's playing this type of like "We Are the Champions" music at practice and trying to get it in their heads, like making them sick of it, just telling them that nobody cares and they want them to get ready for the next season is super cool. And I like that type of coaching. So I would like to see that. And then, of course, I'm sure you know, and I'm sure your fans and your listeners who are Big 12 believers as well, Texas Tech has spent a lot of money this year to find themselves most likely, when it comes to the media day polls, I would not be surprised if they're top 2.
Yeah, UCF was picked 8th last year, and they were one of the worst. I don't think they were the worst, but they were the next worst. It was a bad season in Orlando, 4-8. A lot of games that they could have won that they didn't. They couldn't get the passing game going. But I'll tell you what, they had a second-round draft pick in R.J. Harvey, who was absolutely dynamic last year. They will not have him this year. Miles Montgomery will be the guy that's looking to step up at running back. But I'm not sure if he can carry the running game to the tune of almost 1,600 yards the way R.J. Harvey did. Look, R.J., the only back in the draft that averaged more yards per carry last year than R.J. Harvey was Ashton Genty. And we all know what kind of season he had, right? So if you're Scott Frost, you don't have that necessarily, but you're going to have to find a way to 2 more wins than you got last year, right? I think they'll get the first 2 in the first 3 weeks, and they need to find 4 more wins on the schedule literally anywhere. But how do they project? I think that they're a bottom third of the league team, right? Like, I don't think they're near the half mark, though. I think that UCF is going to struggle next year as Scott Frost looks to rebuild this roster, and that could look like 6-6, right? I think that could look like 6-6.
6-6, I think, is a realistic goal, especially when you're rebuilding this program, not from the ground up, because you bring back the roots of Scott Frost. But again, you were 4-8 last season. If I'm not mistaken, if I have my my statistics correct, it's the first time you guys missed a bowl game since 2015. So
it's been a while.
It's been a very long time. So 6-6, if you get yourself back to a bowl game, even if it's the Pinstripe Bowl, even if it's like the smallest thing, whatever the case might be, if you find yourself there, it's a win. And I think you take that as a program win, and that helps get the recruiting back to where it needs to be. And you're in the hottest recruiting bed in the United States in that area. So I'm all for it. Now, as you mentioned with the media polls, I think on the media side of things, if we want to do that before we get to the realistic, because I think there's 2 different things. I think we can agree with that. I think it's going to be a little lower, but compared to some of the other new coaches in the Big 12, maybe you get a little bit of a bump, like West Virginia's Rich Rod as well, because of the familiarity with the program and things like that. West Virginia was already in the Big 12, though, so maybe there's a little bit more familiarity. So maybe they get above you as well. That's where I'm leaning towards.
Yeah, the other aspect to this that you mentioned with Texas Tech that I think factors into how people perceive where you're going to land is money spent. Now, we all know the House settlement got blocked because the judge essentially is having them relook at the scholarships that they're trying to cut. They don't want them to do it. I agree with the judge. Like, you can't cut those scholarships. However, you've got an $18 million pot that you potentially have to draw from. I don't think right now, my sources are telling me UCF is not close to filling that pot.
That cap you're talking about?
Correct. Yeah, it's $20.5 million, but $2.5 million of it is earmarked for scholarships across the Olympic sports. So that leaves $18 million that you have to spend on players, essentially, that's controlled directly by the school. What UCF has done is they've dissolved their collective, the kingdom, into what they're calling the Competitive Success Fund. And if you can fill that, then you may still need a collective to provide deals outside of the $18 million that you control. If you don't expect to fill that, some schools are getting rid of their collectives and saying, let's just focus on getting our donors to fill this bucket for us, because that number is going to go up every year It's kind of like a raising salary cap kind of year over year. I think that a lot of the media are going to look at the numbers being spent out of these programs when they start to project where people are going to finish. I hate it. That's a part of it. It's no longer just how good are you, but it's how much money did you spend in the offseason to improve your squad. That's what NIL has done, I think, to college football and this discussion about where teams rank.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And we'll see how much of a relation there is when it comes to NIL spending and portal rankings and recruiting rankings based on the known national outlets that we pay attention to, and actually how it means when it's all said and done, when the 12 games are finished, if it actually means something. I think we're still learning that. I don't think there's enough sample size to actually determine if that's actually what's happening, but I'm with you. And that's why I think in the media polls, I think we're going to see Texas Tech find themselves in, dare I say, top 2. I think they'll find themselves, even though Coach McGuire hasn't found himself over 9 wins in a single season since he's been there. Love what he does there, but I just don't think he has the proof in the pudding yet to get himself in the top 2. And, I know we're getting close on time for the next break, but you mentioned something about the running backs and talking about who's going to prove it. RJ Harvey, what a great pick. The first Big 12 running back to get taken off the board, I thought was completely bizarre, and not bizarre, but shocking. I thought it was going to be Cam Scatterboo. Obviously DJ Giddens gets drafted for the to the Indianapolis Colts from Kansas State. But I'm a big college football fan, Mike. You know that, and not just Kansas State, but all of football in its glory. And I love watching college football on Tuesday nights. And Maction is one of the best. Jaden Nixon coming over to UCF from Western Michigan, almost rushed for 1,000 yards. I think that bad boy is going to be good in your backfield as well.
Yeah, like he is definitely a guy to watch there. Running back by committee is how people are doing it these days. You got to have more running back that can do the job. We're not seeing a whole lot of workhorse backs. That's why what Ashton Jeanty, I think, did is so rare these days, because most guys aren't getting enough carries to get to that mark. Like I said, he averaged 7 yards a carry. But when you look at how many carries he had last season, he had over 300 carries, right? Of the top 10 running backs in the country in rushing, RJ Harvey had the least amount of carries of the top 10, but he finished 6th in rushing in the country. So 6.8 yards per carry is tough, man. I'm telling you. But by the numbers, if you gave him the 300-something yard carries, if his yards per carry hold, he's up there with Jeanty in terms of, like, he's over 2,500 yards rushing at 6.8 yards per carry and over 300 carries. So it is interesting when people talk about RJ Harvey. We talked about this on another show about how team success and draft results are so tied together sometimes. Like, when you're on a winning team, it's easier to get noticed in the draft, right? Like, and the perception and the association with losing can hurt some guys. RJ Harvey was able to overcome that, a 4-8 team. I think that's how special he is, to get taken in the second round and over a guy like Cam Scatterboo, who was good, but, like, look, man, his yards per carry numbers weren't anywhere near what RJ Harvey was doing, and he had a lot less carries than Cam had. So it's an interesting discussion. I think both backs are very, very good. You talk about Giddens in this discussion as well too. I had a nice little Twitter debate with somebody about RJ Harvey being taken before Cam and Giddens. And look, man, I think all these guys have a chance to do something special at the NFL level. So it's going to be fun to watch them. A lot of weird things happening, Christian, in college football. The least of them, not how the spring went. This was an interesting spring that we had. We're going to talk about how weird that was right after a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode of Locked On Kansas State is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Did you see how those Indiana Pacers are looking lately? My God, it's been really interesting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when the demand is super high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets even closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. That's perfect timing when you're talking playoff basketball. Here's why I use Game Time, not just because of that Game Time price, but those last minute deals, like I mentioned, save up to 60% off buying last minute tickets on sports and concerts, comedy, theater, everything you love, you name it. It's perfect. Their all-in-one pricing also means no surprise fees at checkout when you see what you pay for. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Christian, spring was weird. Before we started recording, you and I talked about this. It felt like it came and it went, and we barely covered it. Coaches are advocating for eliminating spring games. It is an odd place for college football to be. I'm not really in favor of anything that takes things away from fans. College football has the longest off season of any sport. It's a long time from January to August. But the spring, coaches are advocating more for an OTA type spring like the NFL has, focusing on strength and conditioning, keeping their teams healthy, and not revealing too much for their opponents for the upcoming season. What do you think about the changes that are happening with spring practice? Good for college football, bad for college football? What do you think?
I think the solution, or my thoughts on it, is yet to be determined, but Kansas State did exactly that this season. They only had 10 spring practices this year and had 2 extra weeks of strength and conditioning on the front end. And what we have heard of, it's a good thing. They've added a bunch of muscle. They've talked about it. They made social media posts about it, added the number on it, about their entire team, adding I think it was 70 or 700. I forgot how many zeros it was of muscle for the entire team. They talked about the speed, how they gained all this size, but they still have this speed. They have 4 people in the 24-mile-an-hour club. So we'll see how it goes. But for media guys like you and I, it's terrible. I mean, we're lucky to hear from them once a week, right? Yeah. It's terrible. I'm having a hard time, finding things to talk about because you only get so much from spring nuggets as it is, but when you're already shorting it even more, and yes, the portal's been fun. And if it wasn't for the portal, I don't know what would I do with my hands. I mean, I might Ricky Bobby, throw them up in the air, but that's about it. I really have no idea. But overall, as a output on the field, I think it could be more productive. We'll see. And hey, look, as much as we hate to say it, and I'm a Big 12 believer, but as much as we hate to say it, you have to find every edge and every gain you possibly can when you're in a Power 4 conference like the Big 12 or the ACC to step up with those other 2.
Yeah, I agree. Look, if it helps improve the quality of what the product that we get in the fall, I'm for it in that sense. If that means keeping guys healthy, truly, and making sure that you're more prepared for fall camp and guys are less likely to get injury. You talk to any athlete, they'll tell you the number one reason you train is to prevent injury. And so if you're doing more focus on that, then I am about it. Now, I think it's just become such a media thing, right? With ESPN sending full broadcast teams to a lot of these spring games that we've gotten used to having that access. When you yank it away the way they have this fall with so many not being televised, it seems like a takeaway, I think, for fans who supported UCF through a really, really bad season, but continued to show up to games. Now Scott Frost is back in town and everybody wants to get a little glimpse of what's going on. And, we've got less coverage of the spring than we've had because coaches just don't want to share that part necessarily with the world. There's going to have to have a happy medium here. There was one idea I wanted to run by you before we got out of here, and that's the idea that you could have spring games where you actually play someone else and donate the proceeds to charity. Maybe you play an HBCU in your state, or you play a Division II school, or have something where it is camp style, Christian, where maybe it's more flag football where you wear helmets, shoulder pads, but not full on hitting. I think that
I'll
could
go.
be something that I would like to see. Well, I mean, K-State versus UCF in helmets, but like, you know what I mean? But no tackling. Can we see something like that in the future? Would you like that?
Well, the NCAA didn't like it when Colorado and Syracuse tried to make it just happen just a few weeks ago, and they were trying to make it happen. But I like the idea. Maybe you modify, as you mentioned, make it like a 7-on-7 kind of feel with the helmets and shoulder pads. And I'll even go one step further. Make it a traditional thing for every team to find some sort of rivalry or some sort of partnership with another FCS school. And then you don't put the FCS school on the schedule. Get rid of those marshmallow non-conference games. I'm sorry, I hate them. I can't stand them. It's fun to ever have those, the possibility of the FCS upset every now and again. Okay, great. In week 1 or week 0. But if you tell me instead of that, I was getting a Big 12 versus an ACC school or a Big 12 versus a Big 10 school in that slot as well, count me in every single time.
Yeah. I think it would be fun to see that as well. You make a good point about the FCS schools. Maybe there's an opportunity in the future, but I like the idea of taking the proceeds and donating them to charity, donating them to cancer, patients, anything that helps kind of improve our communities in some kind of way. Using that spring game as a way to reach out to your community, involve your community is always favor of. Christian, my friend, thank you for joining me today. As always, it's great to talk to you. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me everywhere you listen to podcasts, YouTube, audio at Locked On Kansas State, the same places you can find Locked On UCF. And then you can find me on Twitter X at Locked On K-State, where I'm diving into everything with this spring portal, winter portal, this momentum that Kansas State has. And of course, basketball, where there's no momentum on the men's side.
Well, that's it, guys, for another great edition of Locked On Crossover College. If you want more content like this, please hit like and subscribe on both channels. And thank you for making us your first listen of every day. For your next listen, go check out our friends at Locked On Big 12. Our guy Drake Told leads the conversation in conference realignment news and pulls no punches when it comes to talking about every team in the Big 12, including the UCF Knights and the Kansas State Wildcats. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And you can find us here tomorrow on Locked On.